Joe and I are joined by our friends Sydney and Sarah, and we're going to be talking about the movie Charlie Wilson's War by Mike Nichols this week. And so here we go.
Hi, I'm Sarah. So the movie Charlie Wilson's War follows Charlie Wilson, who is a Texas congressman, and he helps to organize a program to help supply refugees in Afghanistan. They're the Mujahideen. Um, they're fighting the Russians, but they're unable to because they're refugees. They're living in these tight camps, and so he helps to raise money, and he supplies them with weapons to help fight the Russians. And so this is the course of the movie, and then by the end, you kind of see Charlie Wilson's view change because by the end of the movie, they've already defeated the Russians, yet he's trying to finish the job there and help provide the refugees with education so they can build their country. However, nobody wants to put money towards that.
Yeah. You also kind of get to see the way he goes about raising all this money. You get to kind of see Hollywood's interpretation of the inner workings of our government and how he took $5 million and turned it into $2 billion. Yeah. Do you want to start with the military?
Yeah. So, like I said before, he provided arms to the refugees, but that they had to cover that up. So nobody knew that those arms were coming from the United States. And
they wanted this fight to solely be between the Mujahideen and the Soviets. They didn't want to be drawn into this conflict as well. So they tried to kind of cover that up. So, Joe, you had something to add about how that was similar to the Cold War?
How what was similar to the Cold War?
Hiding involvement.
Oh yeah, the United States really wanted to fight the Soviet Union, but they never really had a good opportunity to do so. So whenever the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, this provided a perfect opportunity for the United States to be able to take action against their enemies without actually letting the world know that it was them behind the Afghani forces all along. So when they provided these weapons, they really just wanted to make sure that the Russians got beat. And it was a victory for the United States, but in the end, obviously, they weren't interested in anything other than beating the Russians because they didn't supply any support afterwards. They didn't do anything positive to clean up their mess once they got done. So it really shows the United States' selfishness whenever it comes to fighting an enemy.
And also, the United States, part of the reason they probably didn't want anybody knowing they were supplying the arms to them is that they didn't want to put themselves in the middle and get themselves in trouble. They were trying to do this discreetly because they didn't want
an open conflict between the U.S. and the Soviets.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. And back on what Joe is saying, another thing that was interesting militarily was that we did provide them with weapons, but we didn't provide any of these people with training. And they were just farmers, refugees, people that didn't necessarily have a military background, yet we were giving them these weapons that could kill thousands, and that's what they were planning to do. They were planning to fight for their land, for their country, for themselves, but we didn't teach them how to do that. So the conflict did get really messy at times.
And it brings up the conflict or the question, I guess, of like, what if we're going to provide aid, how far should we go? Should we just give them resources and then leave, or should we give them resources, teach them how to use them and then leave, or should we give them resources, teach them how to use them and stay and help them fight and help them get their society back on track? And that's kind of a hard question to answer.
If you have any opinions on that, feel free to comment on any of our social media accounts. Send us an email, tweet Grace. Just, tell us your opinion.
Also, I wanted to talk about how, like, militarily, like, what that does to the society of, like, it boosted their morale. And there's a scene in the movie where I don't know if he was a congressman or something, but he was a guy that Charlie Wilson was trying to convince to give money. So he took him over to Afghanistan with him and showed him the refugee camps, and he let him like give a pep talk kind of to the refugees. And in this scene, they end up all yelling, What is the word? What are the words? I can't remember. Oh, Allah Akbar, which today we would associate with terrorism, which is kind of funny because it's like kind of foreshadowing, I guess, in this movie. And that scene is really, I guess, creepy in a way because they're all like, yelling together, and it's just like this big rally, and people really get worked up and violent about stuff like this. And it makes you think about, like what does this do to a society? What does this do to their morale? What does this do to like their sense of unification and peace? And
Yeah.
it's interesting.
Now, this might be slipping slightly into the social realm of things, but I thought it was interesting how when he did bring the other congressman over, how it's like when he went over to the refugee camps, it's like the only way he would give money was if he actually was there to see the devastation and the destruction that these people have gone through, and then he was willing to give them aid. But then the way he gave them aid, he kind of came in like the United States was, the parent, that they would come and take care of everything, and that we were all powerful and all fixing, and that whenever we came in, like they should be rejoicing and happy that we were there to help them.
Like their savior, sort of.
Yes, exactly. We have the savior complex.
And another thing, like what Grace was saying with the foreshadowing, is that eventually you do see that those refugees, they eventually turn into the Taliban, which is now an enemy to the Afghan army.
Yeah.
So you see that change.
Yeah. That environment was perfect for the Taliban to rise out of those refugee camps.
Yeah, provide a good breeding ground.
Definitely.
And I would have the question as to, this was kind of in my mind yesterday. The U.S., we were talking about yesterday how we've had very little periods where we're not involved in some giant foreign conflict. So I guess something that kind of plagues my mind a little bit is, do we like look for conflict? Like, do we kind of, because I feel like some countries, like until we get there, everything's fine. But then we get there and it's like all of a sudden it's a big issue and there's all this like rebellion, and like all of a sudden there's the world is in a shambles again. And so I guess I kind of feel like maybe it's bad luck or maybe it's just like a coincidence, but like, does the U.S., like, is that necessary for our economy to work? Like, do we always have to be fighting some huge battle to be unified and to be one and to feel like we're like on top? I guess it would be.
Well, it can be justified by an excuse related to defense. You could say that you could hear somebody that would be in the CIA say, well, since we're the biggest dog in the fight, we don't get to sit one out. We don't get to sit on the bench at any time because we're the greatest military force on the face of the earth.
Almost that we have the obligation to go and help.
We don't. What happens over there matters over here.
Mhm.
So,
Like
you can hear somebody use that to justify it, but we don't really. I don't know. I don't know if that's a valid excuse.
I also think that the weapons manufacturers have a big influence over when we're in war,
Definitely.
because they only make money when we are in war, and they have some big money and some powerful people in their pockets. And I don't necessarily think that it's corruption, but I definitely think that we are constantly looking for something to do militarily, and that that really does influence it, because they want their industry to constantly thrive and to constantly be making money, and we're not going to do that if we're not in war. So we find some war to be involved in, or someone to give those arms to, some government to give them to, so that they will pay us and so that we will keep making a profit off of these weapons.
And I think that too kind of relates to how in the movie you see how whenever Charlie Wilson was wanting to defeat the enemy and go out and fight and everything, people were very willing to put money towards this cause.
Yeah.
Like we said before, they originally started out with a $5 million
Fund work with.
yes, and by the end of the movie, you see that was bumped up to $2 billion. That's a big increase. But then at the end, you see how when once the Russians were defeated, people were like, no, we don't want to help out anymore, because Charlie Wilson was saying, oh, let's put money towards their education and to help them.
School. Yeah.
Yeah,
That
put money
school
towards them
was
getting on their feet.
was worth a minuscule amount of money compared to
The
the $2 billion that was donated to.
I think it was $1 million for that school when he couldn't
Yeah,
get it.
Yeah.
it was relatively nothing. It
Yeah.
was meaningless, and we couldn't provide 1 ounce of positive support for the Afghans, but we could provide $2 billion for them to fight the Russians with.
And
Yeah.
I think there was a quote from the movie.
That pretty much summed it up.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a paraphrase.
And-
Maybe Charlie Wilson said, "We go in with our ideals and we change the world, and then we leave. We always leave, but that ball always keeps rolling. It always keeps bouncing."
Yeah.
And obviously, the ball kept bouncing. I mean, you see where it's 2016 now. It's almost 30 years after this event actually took place, and we have extreme unrest in the Middle East. We have multiple terrorist organizations. We have the Taliban. We have ISIS. We have all these groups that have risen out of the ground, that could have indirectly all have started because of the United States just getting involved
And leaving.
In this conflict.
in this conflict.
I also think it was interesting how he could get all this money without really saying what it was for or what it was going to be used for. Like Grace was saying earlier, you literally just have to say, hey, we're going to go fight this enemy. In today's terms, that would be, hey, we're going to go fight some terrorists. And you can get mass amounts of funding without really having a plan. Well, I mean, you do have a plan, but without having a solid way to spend it and to eliminate whatever enemy you are going after. You just simply say, I'm going to go do this, and they throw money at you.
And
You had a comment earlier.
Yeah, I was just going to bring it back to the whole point about how, like, you can't just go in and give money and then leave, because if you do that, we were talking about the other day what happened in Afghanistan, with around the time of, never mind. But it's like there's a quote, it was like going into a 14th century place with 21st century ideas. It just doesn't work. And then yesterday we were talking about how, like, everyone thinks that we're going to get peace in the Middle East, by doing what? Well, a lot of people would say westernizing them. But Joe made a really good point in class yesterday that, maybe they can't be westernized. Their
Not
culture
at
is
this
a
point.
lot different
Yeah.
than ours. And
You can't.
we can't go in there with
Yeah.
everything that we know and just expect it to work for them too.
Yeah.
It's
They
not
have
gonna
their
be-
own way that
Yeah.
they want things to be ran, and that does not include anything Western. They are
Yeah.
not Western.
I mean,
they are regional.
And I mean, it's not even necessarily just that, but they're essentially hundreds of years behind us, and they can't just skip that time of development.
Uh-huh.
You have to go through those years, and then you get to the point where you can be what we like to be called westernized, but you can't just skip all that time. And then there's the question that, are they progressing like we did over those, let's say, 800 years? Because it seems as if their society's almost been stagnant culturally, socially, economically over these years.
And I think
Yeah.
I think something that we forget is that, like, America is really special. Like, we're really unique. We are. The way that we were formed is different than any other society's ever been formed in the world. We fought a huge power, Britain, for our freedom as a country, and somehow we won.
Yeah.
But that's not going to happen everywhere else. We can't recreate that 100 years later in a society that already has too much rebellion for us to even understand. And plus, we don't even understand their culture at all.
That was also an organic occurrence. We can't just go and force that into happening.
Right. It was almost lucky that that happened with
Exactly.
America.
And in order for, if they want any change to happen, they have to want that themselves. We can't just go in and force it on them.
Yeah,
So
that
if they
just
want
causes
something,
issues.
yeah. And so if they want change, then they're going to have to want that already and then have to take steps to get there. They can't just change overnight.
And something I really like believe in is I do believe that like I don't believe that America should be the mediator. You know, we're not like the world, we're not the leader, but we do have. I mean, I think we're here for a reason. You know, our country was given responsibility. With power, with great power comes great responsibility. That's a really interesting quote that I like, and I think that in order for there to be peace in the Middle East, it's going to have to come from them first. They're going to have to want help and reach out to us. We can't go in there and force our hand on
It's
them.
almost like interventions with addicts or, you know, anything like that. Like, you can't just go and force them to do that. Not
Right.
saying that they are addicts, but, or trying to compare them, but the situation is similar. You can't go and force them to do it. You have to almost want to accept help. You have to acknowledge that you have
A
problem.
It requires cooperation
before-
from that party.
exactly before you can go about helping them fix it. And I don't think they've, or I mean, not they as in general, but yeah, but you know, some people, of course, you know, want our help, but as a whole, I don't think the Middle East is quite ready for that yet. So, do you guys want to move on to political?
Yeah, I think we kind of already have a little bit. Actually, we talked about the Russians after the Russians were defeated, people dropping support and the ball dropping thing, but.
So we were only interested in our endeavor, and then once our part was over, we didn't want to go and help the people that helped us.
Right.
That kind of makes me question too, how many other times we've done this in history, of how many times we've gone to a place and we said, oh, we're going to help you.
Vietnam.
Yeah, and then we just kind of leave when the job is only halfway done.
Yeah.
And
Vietnam wasn't even our job to begin with.
yeah, so it's kind of frustrating when you see that, because you don't, until you actually look at an issue in history, you don't necessarily see how we've gone into places, and then we don't really want to finish it once the war part is over. We leave before the reconstruction happens.
Yeah, it's like there are patterns that we fail to see until they've repeated themselves way too many times, and then we do see them, but we still struggle with stopping those patterns from reoccurring.
Yeah, there's an expression that says some people have to have their hands stuck on the burner before they learn that it's hot. You can't advise them and tell them that it's hot. They want to learn their own self.
Yeah,
and
what situation we're
we
in.
keep sticking our hand on that burner, and we can't tell if it's hot or not.
And honestly,
until we get burned real bad.
It takes an extreme problem or drawback from it for us to acknowledge that we need to just stop what we're doing and then reconsider our course of action.
And I'm almost scared about what that reaction is going to be, because I don't think we've found it yet. I don't think we found that thing that's going to make us stop, and I'm scared of what that thing will be.
What would it take?
Yeah.
And honestly, and I'm going to kind of push back a little bit, just in defense of, our country and our decisions. Obviously, we're all human,
Yeah,
we can't,
definitely.
but I just think that I want to go back to the whole thing about how it's easy to sit and judge and
Definitely.
stuff.
And,
And
we're sitting in our ivory tower.
Right, exactly. It's a lot more complicated than you would think,
Definitely.
and I think it's definitely understandable that we have made the same mistake over and over again. Because think about it, there's different people coming into power.
That's
they don't
true.
have experience, and it's a complicated issue, and it's always different. So you may not it may be the same issue, but you don't recognize it until it's over.
And I want to present you guys with a question that our instructor actually presented us with. What if, because we have found that the constant turnover of leadership every 4 or 8 years and the different foreign policies that come with each leader and how different and unique they are, if it would be beneficial to almost have he described it as a czar of foreign policy, someone that can keep that foreign policy consistent for a longer period of time than a president can, so that we don't have these different people coming in, because they don't necessarily, one president could have learned from keeping his hand on the stove for too long, but the next president hasn't necessarily experienced that to learn. They've just been told, but that person needs to
make their own
make their own
mistakes.
mistakes. And it's like we don't have enough time
To make
for
our
that person
mistakes
to
a
make
million
their own
times,
mistakes and then fix it every 8 years.
Yeah.
And it's easy for us to also look back at some of the decisions we've made, because in the moment, these may have seemed right to the people that were making those choices.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
but looking back,
Hindsight's 2020.
yeah.
that's
So
such an
looking
important
back,
thing.
we can see, oh, maybe that wasn't the smartest
Yeah.
idea.
So tell us your opinions. Would you guys see any merit in having someone oversee foreign policy for a longer period of time than a president can?
Can we go through like what we think about that?
Yeah.
I was just gonna say that I think that you could modify that even and say that not necessarily a czar that like makes all the decisions, but just someone
A
who's there
body.
all the time that
Yeah.
knows, like, think about the judiciary system. They're in there forever. They know
That's
the
true.
law. They
That's
know what everything means. So like an advisor who knows all the ins and outs of foreign policy, and if you
Yeah.
can present an idea to him or her and say
Yeah.
him or her can say, look, I don't think this is going to work because
Yeah.
blah 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 blah. Have you thought about this? Have you thought about
Yeah.
this?
And I like that a lot. And I think we should, I don't know if it's really possible at this time for us to almost apply a character trait to whatever that person should be. But I really like how, like the Supreme Court, they are very unbiased in their decisions. And that's why they are there for life. And this person doesn't necessarily have to be there for life, but for a considerable amount of time to be able to see how the world changes and how the world works. And that they should have that unbiased view on things, so that
just be knowledge.
yeah,
You just need someone
exactly,
who's
just
wise
to
and doesn't
purely
care.
present the facts, so that we don't get into a situation where we have almost a dictator over foreign
Yeah, an
policy.
all-powerful
And- yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to checks and balances.
Definitely.
Each branch will set up with a certain amount of power to counter the next one
Mm-hmm.
in the event that one goes rogue. And you obviously don't want to have one head shot caller that's invincible.
Right.
You do not want somebody that's going to make decisions without the threat of repercussions upon them.
Right.
Because then they'll act in their own self-interest. And Sydney said the Supreme Court is unbiased.
not fully, but
No, I see where she's coming from, but I also
they're
think
supposed
that
to be unbiased.
they're a
but they're
council of multiple people,
Mhm.
and we have people from both sides of the aisle on
That's
that
true.
council.
It's important.
And although those people are selected by one person, once a vacancy is there, the person that selects them is elected by the people, and then we have Congress
They have to approve.
that those people are elected by the people. Those legislators are elected by the populace, and the nominees for the Supreme Court are approved, of course, by Congress. So it's not entirely authoritarian. It's based
It's a system.
upon the people.
Really
It's
is,
set
yeah.
up to where the people do have an influence upon
Yeah.
the decisions made.
And if we were to create a body that simply does foreign policy, that simply focuses on that, I think it should be set up a lot like the Supreme Court, and that there are multiple people, that they have to be picked and approved essentially by the American people and who we have elected and put in office. And for that to be successful and for this to not be an extremely long process, I think we almost have to get over our party divides. I mean, I think that's a huge
I think it
issue.
would be interesting if other countries picked someone from the U.S.
That'd be very interesting.
What were you going to say about this whole issue?
Oh, I was going to say, with what Joe was saying with the whole checks and balances and how Sydney was mentioning a body of people coming together to do foreign policy, I think that's a great idea because, like Joe was mentioning, you have these checks and balances to make sure that no group has too much power or they're making decisions that maybe not everyone agrees with. So I think that if we had a group of people that could discuss this, we would have someone in there that's stable and would be able to look at these problems long term instead of just for 4 to 8 years, like it was mentioned before. And also, if we're looking at these foreign policies, we need that long-term people that are going to be there for a while and not just here and now, because they have to have, I think with foreign policy today, we need to have a better understanding of how it works so that way we can make better choices on how we design our policies.
It's dependent upon an educated populace. Everybody needs to know what's going on. Everybody needs to know what the right decision is, what the responsible things to do are.
And that comes with a very transparent government, because there are things like you definitely saw in Charlie Wilson's War. And if we take it back even further to Syriana, how things are hidden from the American
the government
public.
is hiding in the dark so that they can pretty much do whatever they want.
Yep, to be able to move without worrying about their reputation with the American public.
And that's another thing with these, if we had a stable foreign policy group, then it needs to be more well known to the people. Like, I think the Americans need to have more knowledge of what's going on and what plans are being created, so that way we could have a say in it too, and not just people doing it behind everyone else's backs.
Yeah.
Right. It's obviously not going to be a CIA type setup where it's completely clandestine, but it's also not going to be one of those things where we can just allow every detail to the public. We have, as a nation, we have to make sure we responsibly pick the people that we want in these positions, because we don't want them to abuse this cover that we have to give them some. So we don't want them to abuse that, and we also don't want them to ask for any more than what the bare minimum is required.
Yeah, we want the American people to be able to see what this body and what these people what they're doing or what these people are deciding, but we also don't necessarily want every country to know everything that we have planning in every situation that might arise. So it's a balance that we have to figure out.
That's what I was going to say. I think I feel like every issue we've ever talked about goes back to finding that balance. And I think that's so funny because right now, think about how our government is. It's so two-sided. There's no balance. There's no leeway.
Yeah.
And we're just at this standstill and we can't do anything. And it's gridlock, and it's just so frustrating.
And that goes back to me saying that we almost just have to get over ourselves and get over our party divides, because
both sides.
It's both sides. I mean, it's not.
And I think that's kind of
efficient.
I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
I think it's kind of apparent too in our current election is that you can see how none of the candidates are able to agree. They don't want to say, okay, that's a similar idea that I have.
Or not even agree, just compromise.
Yeah.
Compromise is not an option for some people, which isn't.
And that's something that's
a recipe.
Important.
Yeah,
that's important in our country, because in order to come to some sort of conclusion, you have to have people that are going to compromise. You can't just say, I'm going to hold my ground and everyone else has to agree to it.
Am I wrong to say that a successful democracy relies on compromise? That's what it is.
That's what we're built on. That's what checks and balances is built on, definitely. I think that's definitely a fair statement.
And you can look through the past, few decades, almost nothing has been accomplished just because it's so hard, because people feel as that if they do compromise with the other side, they won't be reelected because they did compromise. They didn't hold. I mean, people think that they can get all of what they want.
And that's our fault.
It is our fault.
Because politicians, they're just doing what they think we want. That's what they think the people want, I think.
That's true.
And I think the way that they're campaigning nowadays is just a reflection of how selfish our country has become. We have all these privileges, we have all these things, and we don't take any responsibility. And like the quote I said earlier, with great power comes great responsibility. People forget that so much. We've been given this great nation and freedom, and everyone wants to come here, and there's so many immigrants, but we take that for granted so much, and we blame it on our leaders, and it's not really their fault.
It's our
reflection
of us.
Right, they're a reflection of us, exactly.
And I think that's part of the thing is why it's hard for us to, like we said, we want to go to war, but then we don't want to help them in the end. to provide education or help people build their countries up after whatever has happened. And I think that because we have all these privileges and we have all this stuff here, that we question why we want to spread our wealth, because we don't see a benefit to us. We don't see how it's going to bring something good and positive back into our lives.
Yeah,
we can't just do it out of the good of our hearts.
Yeah. We always have to get something in response. We can't just be, philanthropists. We always have to barter for something else.
So to kind of redirect back to the movie, social issues, I guess basically the social question I have is how does this relate? I guess we could talk about social issues in Afghanistan in this movie. We could talk about social issues in our own government and between the congressmen of the U.S. and but I think it's interesting. I think we already talked about this a little bit. Was how Charlie Wilson was able to get money without even really trying that much. All he had to do was say, "Well, we've got these refugees who want to fight the Soviets, and they're really riled up."
The money was immediately approved without any knowledge of what the money was being approved for. They had this reassurance that it was going to be for a good cause, and we were going to fight against evil, and so they voted for it.
And I feel as if we're very naive socially.
I think it's a little exaggerated too because it's a movie. I'm sure that some things were exaggerated, but yeah, I feel like we hear the word war sometimes and we're just like, okay, what is it? Where is it at? What can we do to help it? But I mean, I'm definitely a firm believer that conflict is necessary and sometimes, and I don't think that I don't think that peace, yes, of course we're going to strive for peace, but is it really attainable?
See, I kind of have the view that yes, conflict is necessary, but I feel as if we use conflict as the answer to everything. I feel like sometimes it's not necessary in certain situations, but because of how our country has acted in the past and kind of this mindset that we have, that we automatically go in with boots on the ground, even though sometimes, and that's, the reaction. Sometimes things happen and we just react.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel as if in a lot of those situations, boots on the ground isn't necessarily the right avenue to go down. Even though definitely it is necessary at times. We're not saying that all war is evil and unnecessary. And it's definitely unpleasant and not a great thing at all. But at times
probable cause. Yeah. We need to look more into probable cause, I think.
And sometimes it is necessary.
Let's see.
Well, while you guys are thinking about that, I just wanted to add a little bit. I do believe that the pen is mightier than the sword. It can be, peace is an achievable concept, but at the same time, you're always going to have a party that won't budge without a fight.
Yeah.
They will not compromise because they are so unwilling to go without what they are asking for that they have to have a conflict. The only option for them is to violently react in order to get what they want. So you guys can continue.
I don't really have anything to say about that. I don't want to stop you. I don't want to cut you off. But I was gonna talk about lack of education as being a really big issue. We were talking about the other day Afghanistan and all the money that we put into it and all the failure that happened and why did that happen. And I think it's important to remember that education is really, really important. Not to repeat myself, but I think it goes back to the whole thing we've been talking about this whole time is, we can't just throw money and leave. You have to make sure that people know what to, the 14th century thing, they don't know how to use some of these weapons we've given them. Some of them don't even know how to read. Some of them don't even know how to write. They're not going to be able to rebuild their society if they can't do those things.
You're putting weapons that are worth thousands and thousands of dollars into the hands of some shepherds and goat herds.
Yeah.
And it's not my place to say that they're unintelligent, but they're just inexperienced.
behind.
They're just
There's
completely
yeah,
inexperienced with it.
ignorance is different than unintelligence.
Yeah.
And I think the word you're looking for is ignorance. They
Yeah.
don't know because they've never been taught and they've never experienced.
And in class the other day, we read an article, and it described the current situation with the Afghan army and the Taliban and what's going on now. And it talked about how right now they're bringing in people from the United States that are trying to train them how to use these weapons. But even if they know how to use the weapons, there's still calculations that they have to make and things that they have to have a basic understanding of.
The art of war
And-
is complicated.
Yeah, and they're not grasping those concepts. So even if they know how to use the machinery, they're still kind of behind in a way because they're not going to understand how to run the war, how to organize
The
themselves.
strategy.
Yeah, and so it's kind of sad to see how just because they're so far behind us that they're struggling with this war, and so it kind of makes me wonder how things are going to turn out in the end.
Definitely.
Without that education, it's going to be difficult for them.
It's like a loop. It's like we just keep going in circles.
Right.
Yes.
Economic. We've
Yeah.
kind of already mentioned that.
I think we could talk about the Zen Master story.
Okay, someone tell that story because I don't know it very well.
Jack?
Well, in the movie, one of the guys that collaborates with Charlie Wilson tells a story about this old Zen master, and this boy, whenever he is 14 years old, gets a horse, and everybody in the village says, "What a wonderful thing that is," and the Zen master says, "We'll see." And a couple of years later, the boy falls off the horse and breaks his leg, and everybody in the village says, "What a terrible thing this is." And the old Zen master says, "We shall see." And while this boy's leg is recovering, a war breaks out, and all the young men have to go to war. But since the boy's leg is broken, he can't go and fight the war. So he gets to stay in the village. And everybody else in the village says, "What a wonderful thing this is." And the Zen master says, "We shall see." And that kind of parallels this entire situation because we've given munitions and weapons to these people in order to fight off these invaders, and in the end they win, and everybody says, "What a good thing we've done. Look at the United States is like, look at us, we contributed to this."
But now the weapons are over there, and now
The
they get to
Taliban
the wrong
formed,
hands,
and
then they
everybody
Have
says,
access
"What
to
a
these
terrible
things,
thing this
yeah.
is." So I mean, it just keeps going back and forth.
And we don't really know, like in the story, people are, each time something new happens, they said, "Oh, that's wonderful," or "Oh, that's terrible." And the Zen master, each time he says, "We'll see." And so I think that just kind of goes to show that in the moment, we kind of look at things and we're like, "Oh, well, that's a great idea. That's a good thing."
That's an awful idea.
Yeah. And we don't really think of maybe how it could be an effect in the long run.
and maybe we can't think about it. Maybe we
It's
can't
true.
really know. Like, sometimes we just have to try things out.
Yeah.
That's true.
And
Trial and error is
yeah.
a thing, and
And
it
I-
does have to happen.
Yeah, and I feel like that's kind of our method right now. Over our approach is definitely, that kind of guess and check kind of thing.
Experiment,
Yes, we
It's an
guess and
experiment.
we say we think this is going to work, and then we have to wait and see what happens because this is very uncharted territory for us as a nation.
There's no
Yes.
historical
Exactly.
matches.
We have never fought an organization like this. We've always fought countries, and with them not being
Associated with
the country, they don't have a method necessarily. They can do one thing one day and completely switch direction the next day, and we have no idea how to deal with that in this moment.
and they don't even really have a government to answer to, which makes
Yeah.
it complicated as well.
Yeah.
I just really, it goes back to my whole belief on the Middle East is just that it's like the most complicated thing we've ever faced in foreign policy. So I think that our foreign policy is really going to have to shape itself, maybe stretch some so that we can actually deal with this issue and get over the moral standings and get over,
It's unlike anything we've
parties.
ever faced. We've got to adapt to this.
Right.
Like,
We have to sacrifice, maybe some of our
Traditional.
comforts and our traditions to deal with this if we're going to deal with it at all.
Yeah.
We're almost out of time, so I think we have a few questions.
Well, we pose most of our questions
Okay.
during the podcast, but if you have any other questions or any responses to anything that we've said or any answers to the questions that we've presented previously, please do not hesitate to comment or email or just get in contact with us.
We'd love to hear from you.
Definitely.
And I think the question that I'd like to leave, I've kind of been thinking about this. What does everyone think about like aid? Like, what should aid be? This whole movie is about Charlie Wilson trying to help the refugees fight the Soviets.
Yeah.
So what in future situations or in past situations, even if you want to comment on that, what should shape aid? What should we make sure we send? Should it just be military? Should it be people? Should it be, what should it
humanitarian
be?
aid?
Uh-huh.
Definitely, that's a really good question. And guys, remember, these are just the views of 4 people. There are many, many more views out there, and there might be some things that we're just not considering.
And we obviously don't know everything.
Yeah,
so.
we obviously don't know everything. So please, if you have any more information, any other views, anything that we might have left out, please don't hesitate to ask. We will answer your questions if you do have any, or if you have questions on what our opinions on certain matters are, we'll definitely address those too.
Make sure you subscribe to our channel and tune in again next Wednesday for another movie review. I'm not sure what it'll be this time.
We haven't
a
quite
mystery
decided.
to us too. But thank you all for listening, and we hope you have a good week.
Bye.